Hello, everyone, and welcome to Writers Drinking Coffee. This is a podcast where writers sit around drinking tasty beverages to talk about writing, publishing, and the whole creative process. There may be rants and raves and opinions that don't agree but are lovingly delivered. We do not censor ourselves, so consider us PG-13. I'm your host today, Jeannie Warner, and this is episode 210, interview with Karen Nelson. Welcome, Karen.
Well, thank you. I'm happy to be here.
I'm so delighted to be here, finding out that, Karen we met through a friend of a friend through work, and she not only has finished her first novel, but she's a co-founder of a nonprofit Writing by Writers. Tell us a little about that. That was kind of exciting.
Oh yeah, so almost 13 years ago, my business partner Pam Houston and I founded Writing by Writers, and it's a nonprofit. We put on writing workshops internationally, I should say. We go to Chamonix, France, but a lot of it's in the West Coast. And we host multi-day workshops with award-winning authors where people can come and get their work critiqued or generate new work. And we do it for all levels. So it can be a 2-hour craft session for someone just signs up. We do manuscript workshops where you have to submit parts of your work to be accepted, and then you get critiqued on it. And then we do a full book critique, which is sort of rare in the writing world. You can come and workshop a full book-length manuscript with one faculty and 4 other people. And then we actually do a 2-year book building project called Draft, which we're about to start again. We only start it every 2 years. And that is basically you get your hand held through putting a book together. So it's a 2-year program where you turn in 75 pages, then 150, and then 225, and then by the end, 300. And it's a small group, and you're guided by faculty all the way through. So it's a sort of a unique thing. There's only a couple other places that do it, and it's one of our favorite projects we have.
Well, it sounds so much better than, I have to admit there's a lot of us that are very grumpy at NaNoWriMo starting to embrace GPT out there these days. So, and I want you to be honest with me here. Did this start because you started thinking, wow, I would love to go to France and sit around and be left alone and just write?
That's how we picked up France. But no, it started, I have always worked in the nonprofit world, and my business partner still works at UC Davis, but at the time she was the head of the creative writing department at Davis, and they were putting on a writing workshop in Tomales Bay, California. And at some point, Davis said, "We're out of funds, we're not going to do this." And the 2 of us happened to be out there with our dogs on the beach and ran into the bookstore, who said, we want to keep doing this even if the university's not behind it. And at that point, I was working for the Leukemia Lymphoma Society Team and Training Organization, and I used to be putting on large scale, bike events and triathlons and marathons, and I was a writer myself, and I thought, I could do this with my eyes closed. No one's gonna fall off their bike, and I don't have to have some emergency plan for broken collarbones. How hard could it be to have a bunch of writers? So we formed our nonprofit, and we took over that writing workshop and then just expanded. So
That's
great.
glorious. I belong to a couple, many different groups that involve, organizing, get it together, the not-for-profit. I guess not-for-profit versus nonprofit, kind of similar, but
I think it's all sort of the same.
yeah. I'm Society for Creative Anachronism for years. So let's get together, 12,000 people to camp for 2 weeks out at Pennsic Wars. And it's people that are willing to just say, okay, there's a lot of moving pieces. Let me organize it. Let me write it down together. There's a lot of overlap in that and in the writing world.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, I think there's a lot of moving pieces when you're writing, and so much of it is about big picture strategy and planning and being able to hold all sorts of ideas in your head at the same time. So it definitely meshes well with each other.
I love that. So I want to dive into your new book, The Sunken Town. You just launched it. We're here to chat about it. The Sunken Town, I loved it. I just
Oh,
wanted
well,
to
thank
straight up
you.
say that I really loved this.
That's wonderful. It's still so early in the process. It's fun for me to hear, when you write for years and years and everyone's always telling you what you need to fix about it. It's funny that it's out in the world and people start saying, "Oh, I loved it." And I think, wait, did they really? Isn't there something that still has to be fixed?
I did. Well, honestly, and this was so much fun for me, is now I go back and look at my old 60s, 70s, 80s books, and it's beautiful because grown up me now finds typos that child me never found when I read this stuff. And when you're holding your hands and saying, this person published 60 books and there's typos, and you get tears of joy because it's sort of like the time that I went to the concert and saw Danny Elfman on stage and he forgot where he was in Dead Man's Party.
Oh, wonderful.
And I was just like filled with joy because, and you could tell because his guitar player just slowly shot him this sideways look and then calmly went back and played it again. And and everybody else was like, why are you fixating that? I'm like, because it makes us one of them.
It definitely
Everybody
does.
out there, when you find that. But going back to yours, I loved that somehow you found a way to make, and this is very much a human interest in humanity interacting story. You still found a way to have a James Bond opening.
I did.
And I wanted to ask about that. Did you decide that, or did you write it? Or did you write it later? Did it come back? How did it come to you saying this was the most dramatic scene and you opened with it?
Well, it came to me later. It's actually sort of an interesting this I wrote this book over 20 years and it spent a good number of those years in a drawer. But when I first wrote it, two things had happened. I, like my protagonist, Lindsay, I am adopted and I've never given much thought to that fact. And I've always said, I'd have to be forced on the journey. And then I also, at the time, my boyfriend out of college was asked to take care of a house in Maine where the woman who lived there had gone out for milk or something, had been killed in a car accident, came back. And so when I went to visit and you walk in this house, it told so much about the person. And so I took those two ideas of having to be forced on a journey to find your birth mother and walking into a house that told so much and put them together. And I wrote a full 300-page novel just about Lindsay discovering this.
Right.
And for those who haven't read the book, it's it's about a 30-year-old woman named Lindsay who never gave much thought to the fact that she was adopted, and she inherits her birth mother home, Claire, and it sends her on a journey she never planned to take. And along the way, she finds out the extent to which everyone was willing to protect her. So there's the little elevator pitch. But I wrote that whole book and I put it away. And then I wrote another book. And then I was starting to write my third, which was going to be this story about Claire set in a small New England college. And I love sort of the secret history and the dark academia. And I was all set to write that. And it turns out I'm not very dark. And so as I started writing it, and it was also set in Maine, I thought, oh, I'm writing a layer of that book in the drawer.
Mm.
So what I had done was written Claire's academic series. So I started in September. So we got September, October, goes through May. So I wrote that all. And then I ended up putting the two together. And at the very last bit, I had started the Claire's story off a writing prompt that I was given. And I kept that writing prompt as the first line for ages and ages. And then I finally switched it to be something was appropriate. But then when I wrote that May journal entry, I thought, nope, this is where we start. So that's why that got moved up front. And then I had to deal with everything else because now Lindsay's story originally just had a dead mother and that was it. Now I've written Claire's story, which is Lindsay's birth mother. And suddenly I have a father who's still alive. I have intrigue. I have friends and family. So I had to put the two of them together and see what happened and how that affected Lindsay going forward.
Well, I want to say, who amongst us in our melodramatic teen years never thought of faking her own death? I mean, I even did once, but I did it as a joke, and my friend hit me really hard because it was funny and horrible. It is to say that it's interesting. I love that you found that it was two books that were really one book too, because It was at first. I did not realize that when I was first starting to read it that there were going to be two perspectives in it. It took me a moment of going back and forth, but one of the strengths that you had is you set the times differently because the world changes a lot,
Yes.
even in Maine.
So I wrote the Lindsay storyline so long ago that I was probably 30 at the time. And so when I ended up writing Claire, who I knew she needed to have her college time set similar to when mine was because I wasn't ready to do a whole bunch of research. I then moved Lindsay to being 30-year-old today. And so the original draft of that actually, she didn't text. She read a lot of books, So
Yeah.
in my final kind of rewriting phase, when I moved it all forward, I had to go through and change a lot of the details to be current with today. Now she listens to podcasts, she texts her friends, she doesn't read What to Expect When You're Expecting. She reads what a mommy blogs. So it was a kind of an interesting feat to go through and have to fast forward it all into this day and age because you don't think about it when you're writing, you just write what you know. And then I had to think, oh gosh, what's different today than was 30 years ago?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I have a deep love from Sherlock Holmes, and there was a point where it's like they find bits of cigarettes and they go to the tobacconist to find who bought them. And that is just alien to future us now, but was perfectly reasonable, set in the time it was.
Exactly.
I work in IT security, and I always tell people, oh, honey, you're carrying around your tracker at all times. You don't need there's no turning the GPS on. It's not about your global positioning. It's about the towers around you.
Exactly.
But I want to say at first you used a device that sometimes has made me crazy in a book, but you did it differently.
Oh,
The idea is really by not telling me this, you've caused it. For instance, if I have people trying to kill me and I went to go hide at your house, the whole, well, I won't tell you because you'll just go defend me and you might die, is the stupidest plot twist ever a guy wrote. And I liked it. And you didn't do that precisely. It's like I had a little bit of, you didn't think to tell me this thing had been going on for decades regularly and all this, but people do forget that not talking can be a habit too. And you brought in the psychology, which I really liked. You had, yeah, she has a dad that drinks too much, which you, the excusing is I drink too much. And on the outside, it's like, that's alcoholism. And that's how do you deal with a regular alcoholic? And how do you deal a lot of these issues and the defense mechanisms that people bring up? And you respected that. And so you took a trope and made it believable in ways that very few do. And I liked that.
oh, well, thank you. Thank you very much. I haven't heard that before, so that's great.
Well, I mean, haven't you ever watched TV or Buffy the Others and said, if you tell them that you stole
Oh,
the
yeah.
the bracelet,
Well, nothing makes me crazier than that. The plot line where if you would just talk to each other, like that.
yes.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
It
No,
says you slept with him. Did you sleep with him? No. What?
yeah,
Okay, I'm just
that
trying.
would solve the whole thing. No, I agree. And it was important to me to have because in real life, if I had suddenly inherited a home, the first thing I would have done was picked up the phone and called my mother.
Yeah.
And so, I had to write a book that there would be a reason for that not happening because otherwise there wouldn't be a book. And so the first thing I did was put them out of the country, which was easy, but then try to find justifiable reasons that I could live with as a
Yeah.
writer for
Yeah.
not telling them. And and when you do realize that she kind of has to come, she's older, she's 30, she's not 22, and she needs to sort of decide what she feels about it
Yeah.
even though her parents have been supportive all along, it's a big thing. And so it was kind of interesting to try to write that differently. And then not wanting to tell the best friend, because again, after my mother, the next phone call or text would have been to my best friend. And to have that be a little more charged because the best friend lives where she lives now, and the best friend really thinks children are the best thing ever, and Lindsay's not interested in that, and so to kind of have her have some barriers and complexities with the relationships that she doesn't want to have everyone know straight away. And she's also independent and wants to do things herself. and, and so have that play out.
My brother apparently came unglued. I remember him coming unglued when somebody first said to him, my aunt said, "Hey, yeah, when your mom was pregnant, I offered to take her to Mexico to get rid of it."
Oh no.
And he somehow took this as a personal affront. And I didn't understand that because it's like even teenage me was looking at him and saying, "But you didn't exist, so it wasn't ever about you. Why are you making this about you?"
Yes. Oh, interesting. So
Yeah,
interesting.
so I mean, it's the very femaleness of your book is what I kind of enjoyed. Like there was another female idea, the jewelry that Lindsay
Yes.
made and that Claire wore, and the recognition of it that like, hey, this is distinctive and a signature piece, and it can knit together two larger friend groups. I was trying to say, well, how if I was changing everything, and then this had been a boy adopted and found his father, what would have been that commonality? Because the jewelry makes it as jewelry and recognition we women recognize for each other. How would you even do that for a boy?
Yeah, gosh, they'd have to be something.
That's your father's phone. No,
Yeah, exactly.
wristwatch, but nobody really looks at wristwatch that isn't a boy. So maybe a boy would have noticed, hey, but it's not
Yeah,
distinctive.
I don't, they would notice like a signed baseball in the back of the room or some trading cards. Although I'm dating myself with that, I don't think kids these days have those, so I don't know.
Well, there's that knitter, that the Olympic diver knitter.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah.
Wow, that looks exactly like the sweater that knitter was making.
You're right. It definitely has a much more female feel. I try to, they always say, write what you know. And originally it was just all women. I didn't have the dad, so it was even more of a mother-daughter story. But I think adding in having the dad gave it a dimension that having her birth dad and having her adoptive dad to be able to play those two off of each other, I think changed the way the story came about for me because it added a layer with them both being alive. It's like the
Right.
alcoholism and, would you have chosen something different if you had that choice? And, that's a hard question. So I think it's something that I wanted to sort of explore a little bit more.
It is. It also kind of, for me, there's been a leitmotif that's popped up a lot recently. And part of it is the relationship of parents to children and children to parents. Like I'd been reading a book from Martin Trainer that was, what if you have a girl that doesn't particularly like her parents? And that goes in the face of everything that is, the common societies, a parent is going to love their child. Well, not all of them do. Well,
Right.
a child's going to love their parents. I mean, the crow taught us that mother is the name of God on the lips of children, but it ain't necessarily so.
Yes.
And I like that you challenge that a little bit here of that, saying you can love somebody without really respecting them, or you can love somebody without acknowledging their frailties and where they are not perfect too.
Right. And I think that also being able to see that your parents are human too. That is something that comes with age. So, I'm not sure that I could have written this at age 22 in the same way.
Yeah.
As I do see, obviously with my own parents, I see that, but I see my friends with their children going through that, like the children starting to realize, that their parents have flaws and
Yeah.
and how do you balance that out? You don't want to have all your characters be all good or all bad, but you want them to be human and flawed. And so to make them as realistic as possible and have it be that Lindsay's realizing the shortcomings of her own parents, but that's okay.
Yeah. And by 30, we kind of all have an idea of who our parents are.
Yeah,
And that'll change by the time they're our age again. But
of course.
can I ask a super secret question that was not
Sure.
clear for me in the book? Claire, it was Claire Williams, right?
Yes.
So
Had to think.
what was it? It seemed that there was something that you hinted at in The Sunken Town that made Claire's inherited identity strange. Do I need to reread it? It almost implied a third generation of secrets.
Oh, I think what you're picking up on just is that she changed her last name. No, I'm sorry. It's Lindsay Williams and it's Claire Sullivan. That's where I'm getting
Oh,
confused.
okay, right,
Yeah.
right.
So, sorry. And I wrote this so long ago, you'd think I could keep my character straight. So, with Claire, she changes her last name in order to obscure her identity so that the family of the birth father can't find her. So, there's that layer. And then Lindsay, with the last name of Williams, it's become kind of, it's her name, obviously, but it's also her adopted family name. So she has that whole family tree going back. I think it says in the book there at some point, as an adoptive child, you take on the ancestors of your adopted family. And if your parents are like my parents, they just act as if they're exactly your relatives. But in some way they're not. So it's an interesting feeling as like my character, I was interested in my grandparents because I knew them. But anytime my mother started to talk about anyone farther back from that, they just, I mean, whatever. They weren't related to me in the same way that she was related to them. And it was so interesting to her because it was her whole lineage. So I think to have just, your lineage be what you know of yourself. And with Claire, she was also an orphan. So her lineage stopped with her. And then when she changed her name, that was a whole nother matter. So there was just sort of that confusion, I think, with the names and what it means.
Well, names are so interesting to assume a different name and the becoming a different person. And some of it is that nature versus nurture, and some of it is the how do we remake ourselves? And I always love those kinds of discussions because, okay, her parents died in a car wreck and she went off. In a way, she's free to be whatever she wants to be then, even if she has to figure that out.
Exactly. And that's why she goes across country to this new school as an exchange student, so that her parents had died very publicly. And so she wanted to be anonymous again. And that idea of starting over. But then, of course, she gets mixed up with these families that are, for generations, have been very difficult, I will say. And so, what does that look like? But also having the freedom to fake her own death, which she does in the first part of the book because she doesn't have that lineage, so she can start over. Yet she also has friends that she's made. So, it's, yeah, what do you reimagine of yourself? What are you giving up? What freedom do you have? And what happens when you try to start over if you maybe have put yourself in a worse situation? So,
Exactly. And
yeah.
it sort of made me wonder, like here we are in the world of a patriarchy. Are boys more trapped by what is expected of them, or are girls more trapped by what is expected of them? And you raise an interesting point that perhaps boys are just more trapped because girls have greater facility for reinventing.
Oh, that's an interesting idea. Yeah.
I mean,
I
I
hadn't thought about that.
you feel bad for Sloane and Vasis, or these are characters, you're going to love them. I even liked Sloane. Sloane says, yep, this is who I am. This is what I want because this is going to achieve my goals.
Right.
And you have poor Trey that isn't, it's like he sort of just gets let alone. He tries to rebel a little bit. He wants to rebel a little bit. But in the end, without a secondary crutch of Claire staying in his world, he just goes down, okay, my predetermined path, nothing I can do, here I go.
Yeah.
I feel
Yeah,
bad for the
absolutely.
boys that way. I blame the patriarchy.
There you go. We can, yes, always blame. When in doubt, blame the patriarchy.
Definitely, definitely. So I guess now I'm wondering, and so you have Lindsay staying in Maine. Is she going to stay in Maine? You have a possibility of a future. You have the Lindsay Lucas story. Because I mean, I kind of liked Lucas. I started pulling for Lucas there at the end.
Yes, when I finished writing this book, I felt like I could write an entire another novel about these characters. And interestingly, since it's been out in the world, people keep asking me if I'm going to. So,
Well,
so
that means you invested us in it.
I did, but I'm not going to spoil the ending, but I do leave you in a place where I hope that there is some satisfaction, but there is also a lot of potential future that could happen. So,
There's satisfaction, but there's question. Like I said at the end of it, when I was still saying, okay, so you had Claire's parents die and she moved across country to get away from it. Who were her parents? Is now
Exactly, exactly.
Is this like, okay, Kobe went down with his daughter in an helicopter crash, and where are we now? And
I could do all that. Yeah, I could go certainly into the Lindsay and Lucas. Lindsay could meet, right now. She's not interested in meeting more of the birth father's family, but there's all that and go into that history. There's so much.
it is.
I
And
better get writing.
well, it is an interesting world that all of the characters come from privilege.
Yes.
And in the first book, it's sort of this privilege versus that privilege, tradition versus going your own way. There's opportunity to explore of, can it get taken away? What happens when it's not? Or bringing in privilege versus the have not in the world too.
Right, right. And I think for me, that was what was so interesting. I grew up perfectly privileged in California, but going to a small New England college was a whole new experience for me of a level of privilege and old money and ancestry that I hadn't experienced. And so I wanted to tap into that with this book a little bit, just to show that, but maybe not show it in the way that, I mean, there's many novels that are written just about that.
Yes.
But I didn't want her to be, oh, she's poor and now she's among the rich, or I wanted it to be a world that she was comfortable in, yet so unexpected and different to her, with the difference of kind of the Puritan New England versus the growing up in California, and to focus on those differences.
Well, I loved it. So the sunken town, first of all, I also love the way you described it. This is a very rich book. And as she's in the water swimming around there, I'm like, you took all of us with you. And that was super cool.
Well, thank you. Well, these towns exist. You probably know that,
Yep. Yep.
and this one is modeled after. It's called Flagstaff Lake in Maine, where there is a town underneath it, and I had gone canoeing over it as my college did orientation trips where you would go out in the wilderness for a week, and that was how they bonded you to each other.
Yeah.
And in that, I remember looking over the side and just being like, it just creeped me out, and I know here in California we have a Folsom Lake, and when the water levels go down, you start to see things. And to me that was just, I don't know why, it doesn't seem right to me. And so that just always hung with me. And I originally wrote about it, but then as I kept going, it starts to take on it becomes the metaphor, sort of the central metaphor of the book, and much deeper meaning about everything that looks so beautiful and serene on the surface, but you don't necessarily know what's happening underneath. And are you willing to look down under the surface to see everything that's being hidden, and uncover it?
Yeah. No, as I said, the imagery was perfect in a lot of ways. It kind of, is that how you decided on your title? Because again, each of these decisions that a writer makes is interesting. Did you ever go through different ones, or was it always, nope, it's definitely the town?
Oh, I went through so many titles. I think the first title was just novel, and then
That's a
I still
beautiful
call
title. I
it.
too have written novel.
I think that's what the file said, and then it was called main novel for a long time. No, the Sunken Town was an early title, and then I went through several others, and I'm trying to remember if I think there's a quote at the beginning of the book. So I at one point called it Between Two Pines, and I'm trying to remember what else I called it. There were so many different things that got called, and it came back to The Sunken Town, and that's what it was called when I submitted it to the publisher. And at the time, the publisher said, how attached you are to the title. And I said, honestly, you can change whatever you want. I'm just thrilled that you're interested in the book. And so I thought we'd change it, and nobody came up with anything better. So it went right back to The Sunken Town. I'm really happy with it now. It took a while, but I'm very happy with it.
Now, did you go the traditional finding an agent, or how did you come to have an argument with the publisher over the title?
I wouldn't say argument. They're very supportive. I am with this wonderful publisher that is called Sibylline Press, that publishes the work of brilliant women over the age of 50. And those are their words. But I love it. So I did both. I've written my whole life, and for a long time, it was not important to me to become published. And then at the beginning of the pandemic, one of my members of my writing group said, okay, we got to double down. I live alone, and I don't have a busy job and I need to write a new novel. So, let's kind of get our writing group together over Zoom. And we did. And at that point, I had this book and I had another book, both of them sort of in the drawer. And I started to write something new. And then I thought, why? Why am I writing something new when there is two books that I could go back to? And so that's when I really decided, okay, let's finish this and let's see where we go. And at the same time, one of my peers had recently published, and I thought, okay, and I see how she did this, I can do it. And I also had a discussion with a wonderful writer named Melissa Febos, who had told me that when she was in grad school, her professor said to the class, you're all worthy of being published. You're all good enough writers, but that what it's really is, it's who lasts the longest. And so she used the analogy of last hand on a hard body, which is that contest where people have to keep their hand on the car, and whoever keeps their hand on the car longest wins the car, and people are wearing diapers and everything they can do. And so that sort of was like the last little push of like, you're right, I can stick in this and I can make it happen. So
That's awesome, actually.
I know it was a
I
wonderful,
never really thought of that.
analogy. And so at that time, I did both. I work in, as you heard, the nonprofit with a lot of very accomplished writers. And I was going the agent path, but I was also going the small press path because so many people I know have had such a wonderful experience with the small press. And I really liked hearing about that. Not that Random House was asking for me, but I wanted to, if I was with one of the big five, I felt like I'd be this tiny little fish. I just wanted to be with a group of people who really cared. And so I was going to agents and small presses at the same time. This small press picked me up, and I just love everything about them, that they focus on women, that they focus on women over 50. And they've been incredibly supportive. And it's just been really neat because I am over 50, not too far over 50, but an agent is looking for someone who is 25 and they can be with their whole career.
Yeah.
And these women, when what they found as they've made this press, is that many women my age or over 50, they don't have one book. They have two books or three books. And so they said, if you have something else, we're interested in reading it. And me, along with several other writers, have. And so they wanted to just develop a long relationship with us. So I am thrilled. They're publishing my next book. And I feel like going forward, when I get my act together to write the following one, they'll certainly consider it. So it's been just great. And to have had input into everything, the cover, the title, the marketing, they've just been very supportive. I can send an email and I get a response within, 5 minutes, no matter what time of day it is. So it's amazing.
Something some of us don't even aspire to. That's too amazing.
Yeah. And I really believe in small independent presses. I believe in independent bookstores. It all just kind of goes along with what I think is important to have art in the world.
All right. Favorite independent bookstore in your town?
Ooh, well, the one I go to most often in my town is actually Linden Tree Books and they're primarily children's books because we buy books for all my friends' kids for every holiday. But I would say my real favorite would be Point Reyes Bookstore up in Point Reyes. They're someone I have partnered with for years at my nonprofit. It's a wonderful community bookstore. The owners are fantastic. It just keeps West Marin going. So if anyone's ever out there, I recommend stopping there.
Well, you have to go out there because Cowboy Creamery is out there. The Marin French cheese place is out there. Plus, you mentioned Tamales Bay oyster, and I'm all about the oysters.
Oh, yes, absolutely. The oysters and the cheese, yes.
So this is not a propos of nothing whatsoever. This is a month with an R in it, and you only get oysters in months with an R. So everyone on Christmas break should definitely go try the oysters up at Tamales Bay, Point Reyes. Do it.
Absolutely.
Well, this has been fabulous, and we will put links to the fascinating things we discussed during this episode on our website, which is www.writersdrinkingcoffee.com. Karen, thank you so much for coming with me today.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It's been fun to chat about the book.
Well, it's wonderful, and I want links for your Writers by Writers. That could be incredibly useful for people out there. So I hope everybody not just picking up Karen's interesting book and reading it, especially if you know adopted people. It's got a lot of interesting emotions and how people deal with them and how you relate to family. And all of these things, I think, speak deeply to what's going on with all of us at Finding Our Connections. So thank you for writing it.
Oh, thank you very much.
You've been listening to Writers Drinking Coffee, a labor of love and enthusiasm put together by the hosts. Our main web magic is cast by Deirdre Schween, and our sound engineer and backup web spider is Ksenia Chernyevskia. Our intro and exit music is performed by Michael Ingberg, who lives down under at Hervey Bay and runs Tin Can Music School. Our podcast sponsors are Jackal Design, The Bean Street, Arm Street, and wherever you buy really cool independent books, and where you like to take your note back to write. So hey, thanks very much for listening.